Hello there. You're about to listen to a recorded portion of a worship service at Maryville Friends Church. We upload our children's worship and our sermons for those who aren't able to be here on a given Sunday, or for those who might simply be interested in what we're doing. We hope you find this recording to be a blessing on your day. Thank you.
Okay, I may need your help. You want to come up here just a minute? Okay. I'm just going to, I've got I'm going to be talking about small things today. I'm going to be talking about little short things, little small things today. And it's all about the little short things, the little small things. I didn't know if you knew it, but it is all about the little short things and the little small things. And, so, it's all about doing little bitty things, about doing little small things for each other. And that's what I was wanting to focus on. And so when we think about little things that we can do for other people, just little small things, little quick things, little short things we can do for other people, one of the things we can do is to smile. So I want you to smile really big to everybody out here and everybody back there. Big smile now. Big smile. We got it. There we go. We're getting it going up here. All right, we got big smiles. Those are small things. Now, another thing we could do is we could give everybody a high five. So go back through there and give everybody a high five. All right? I'm going to give Joan a high five. There we go. I'm going to give Jonathan a high five. Miriam a high five. Little small things. Little things. Not much of anything, but it brings a smile to somebody's face, doesn't it? Oh, he's got it going. Look at this. These guys are quick. You want efficiency? Get these two fellas. Okay, we got it. All right, thank you very much. Here, five. There we go. We got it done. So we're doing little small things. And actually, this is something that the Lord really appreciates for us to do. Got each other, didn't you? Okay, so the other thing we can do, we can smile at people. We can give them a high five. We can also be, one thing they talk about, I'm a dietitian, one of the thing they talk about is mindful eating. Pay attention to what you're putting in your mouth. Everybody's closing out. Some are hiding themselves. You know, that's one way to watch your weight is be mindful. The other thing you can do though that's small, that's really important when you're talking to people, is to be present. Like I'm talking to you, I'm looking at you. I'm not over here saying, well, hello, you know. I'm looking at you. And so, be present for people. When you're going to visit somebody, when you're going to talk to Bill, or you go back there and talk to Mom, or you go back here and talk to someone else, be present. Look at them. Talk to them. Listen to them. Be present for them. These are just some small things we can do. And actually what inspired me this week is just a quote by Mother Teresa, who did a lot of big things for other people. She reminded us, we cannot all do great things, but we can do small things with great love. Let's bow our heads. Dear Lord, thank you so much that we can do small things, little things. We can do those little things for others and do it with great love, and that is so appreciated by you, and it's appreciated by others. Amen. And now I have these flowers, and I'm not going to let you give them out right now because they're wet on the bottom. But after church, we need to give them out, okay? And everybody can take some flowers to someone. That's a small thing. Or you can take them home if you feel like you need a lift yourself. Okay?
Like take the entire race?
Huh? Take them to the race?
Take the entire vase.
Take the entire vase? Well, we'll take them in and do something with them. Okay?
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I am going to take one vase with us back here.
Good morning, friends. It's good to see everybody this morning. I'd like to open up by reading out of the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 45. It says 3 to 11 and 21 to 28. I'd actually like to start and do 1 to 11 and 21 through 28, if you'd like to follow along. Genesis 45, starting with verse 1. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants, and he cried out, "Have everyone leave my presence." So there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly that the Egyptians heard him, and Pharaoh's household heard about it. Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still living?" But his brothers were not able to answer him, because they were terrified at his presence. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "Come close to me." When they had done so, he said, "I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will not be plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of the entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Now hurry back to my father and say to him, 'This is what your son Joseph says. God has made me lord of all Egypt. Come down to me, and don't delay. You shall live in the region of Goshen and be near me, you, your children and grandchildren, your flocks and herds, and all you have. I will provide for you there, because 5 years of famine are still to come. Otherwise, you and your household and all who belong to you will become destitute.'" And then skipping ahead to verse 21. So the sons of Israel did this. Joseph gave them carts, as Pharaoh had commanded, and he also gave them provisions for their journey. To each of them he gave new clothing, but to Benjamin he gave 300 shekels of silver and 5 sets of clothes. And this is what he sent to his father: 10 donkeys loaded with the best things of Egypt, and 10 female donkeys loaded with grain and bread and other provisions for his journey. Then he sent his brothers away, and as they were leaving he said to them, "Don't quarrel on the way." So they went up out of Egypt and came to their father Jacob in the land of Canaan. They told him, "Joseph is still alive. In fact, he is ruler of all Egypt." Jacob was stunned. He did not believe them. But when they told him everything Joseph had said to them, and when he saw the carts Joseph had sent to carry him back, the spirit of their father Jacob revived. And Israel said, "I'm convinced my son Joseph is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." Let us pray. Heavenly God, we're so grateful to be together this morning to worship you and to lift our voices and open our hearts. We ask now that these words about to be spoken and any words that come out of the communion time to follow will be inspired by your Holy Spirit and will be put to your use. All this we ask in your name. Amen. Have you ever heard the expression, "Revenge is a dish best served cold"? It sounds like something that would be really old, right? Shakespeare or Latin or Roman or something long ways back. It's actually only been around for about 150 years that we know of in English. The first proof we can find of it in English was in an 1846 novel, French novel, called Matilda. But it's been used more and more recently. The Godfather features it as an important quote. It's said to be a Klingon proverb in Star Trek. It was used in an action movie called Kill Bill recently. So it's become a kind of a common meme for our culture, this idea that revenge is a dish best served cold. The idea being that you want to take your time, you want to plan it out, You don't want to go off half-cocked and hot-blooded, but you want to be calculating and cruel about it even. It's not a very nice idea by any means. It's certainly not a very Christian idea, but it's become very common. At least that phrase, because the idea of taking vengeance, the idea of getting revenge, hurting somebody back because they've hurt you, goes back a very, very long way in history and in the arts. When you were in high school, you might have had to read or see the play Hamlet by William Shakespeare. All about revenge, and everybody ends up dead at the end. Because another proverb about revenge is, when you go to get revenge, make sure you dig 2 graves. One for you, one for them. Count of Monte Cristo, also very important literary masterpiece. All about the cycle of revenge. Ancient Greek play Medea, about a woman that gets betrayed by the hero that rescued her and ends up killing her children out of vengeance. And on and on and on. I could go on about the works of art over the decades, centuries, millennia, that have been about taking revenge and getting vengeance and paying somebody back for the unjust action that they've done to you. And you don't just see it in culture and in art and in plays and in movies and in songs. You see it in real life too. When you have feuds, blood feuds, clans, it still goes on in many, many places. The most famous one, I think, probably for our area is the Hatfields and the McCoys, which, as I understand, has ended, but for decades after the Civil War. Cycle of violence continued and continued and continued. Country of Albania has a real serious problem right now with blood feuds that are still going on. It's part of human culture, maybe a part of human nature. It's ugly, it's not pretty, it's not something we're proud of, or at least when it's somebody else doing it. Those that are in the middle of it, of course, just see it as justice, paying somebody back for what's been done, making things right, setting things straight. But when you're on the outside, it looks horrible and terrible and you can't understand. Even some parts of the Bible almost sound like they're okay with that. We have all heard the verse, eye for eye and tooth for tooth, right? And to us, many centuries later and millennia later, that sounds like a pretty terrible commandment, even law, we should say, verse to put in the Bible. Of course, what we don't understand is that while we say eye for eye makes the whole world blind, because that's what ends up happening, in the time when the Bible was being written, that was set down as a rule to make the cycles of violence less terrible, less horrible, because it laid out a specific way that justice could be done. If somebody took out the eye, it could only be restricted, the penalty, to the eye. You couldn't kill somebody in response for that. Somebody knocks out a tooth, the justice, if you want to think of it that way, could only be limited to knocking out the tooth in response. It couldn't be escalated. It couldn't be made grander and bigger. And the idea was to limit it, to make it an equal treatment. And especially to make the rich not able to say, well, I got my tooth knocked out by this poor person, so I'm going to kill them in response. If anybody in the Bible deserved to revel in that ugly, unpleasant, hot-blooded or cold-blooded part of human nature that wants to take revenge, wants to get vengeance, wants to pay somebody back for being hurt. If anybody in the Bible deserved that, when you look at his life, Joseph would make probably the top 10 of people that deserve to get revenge for what was done to them. Because think about the story and think about his life up to this point. Sure, in this passage, he's become the Lord and Master of all Egypt. He's got a household, he's got servants, he's got the ear of the Pharaoh, he commands the armies and the granaries. He's the one that saved Egypt by being smart about how to deal with the oncoming famine that he knew was going to be coming. He's the one that used Egypt's grain and wheat to help the surrounding areas and surrounding nations. But think back to when he was a young man, and the most famous story about Joseph and the coat of many colors. And what an arrogant little brat he was about it. Because that's the thing about Joseph and the story of many colors. When you look at it, and when you think about it, especially as a sibling, and you think about what it would be like if your little sibling came up to you and said, "You're going to bow down to me one day. You and all of the rest of you, and Mom and Dad, you all are going to worship me." It's kind of arrogant, right? Kind of obnoxious, kind of bratty. I know if I was Joseph's older brother, I would probably want to teach him a lesson, right? And it's easy to look at the story of Joseph and think that way and say, well, he kind of deserved what he got, right? Because he was an obnoxious prick. However arrogant he was, however obnoxious he was, and full of himself about this coat, does that really justify being thrown down in a well and then sold to slave traders? Really? Like, if I was to get mouthed off to by my little brother, and in retaliation I locked him inside a box and mailed him to Timbuktu, would you really say that was justified? That was appropriate? Would it really be a laughing matter? I mean, it's kind of funny to talk about. Kind of funny for me to picture. But that's not really appropriate. We laugh about it because it would never happen, right? That's what happened to Joseph. However much of an arrogant jerk he was, he didn't deserve to be sold into slavery in Egypt. That was not okay. That was not cool. And what makes it even worse is that that's actually the softened version, because what the brothers wanted to do to him originally was just throw him down the well and leave him to die. And they decided, well, we can't go that far, so we'll sell him to these passing slave traders. But at least we didn't kill him, because that makes it okay, right? As long as you don't kill the person. And then they go back and tell their dad that he got killed by wild animals. But this isn't the story of why Jacob needs to be angry. This is about Joseph and his reaction to what happened to him. So he's sold into slavery, down to Egypt, works there. Then his master's wife accuses him of rape. And even thousands of years later, within our history, if somebody of a different ethnicity was accused of raping their quote-unquote better's wife, would anybody have batted an eye in those days if the retaliation was instant killing? Would anybody have batted an eye, even within the last 100 years, if the retaliation was death? Not like our culture is really that much less violent than the Egyptians, was it? And that's what Joseph faced at that moment. Nobody would have said anything among the Egyptians if a slave's master killed him for attempting to rape his wife. Fortunately, Joseph only got thrown in jail for many years. So here he is, snot-nosed kid, yes, but almost murdered and then sold into slavery by his brothers. Very, very close to being murdered in quote-unquote justice by his owner. And now he's in jail. It's a pretty rotten life up to this point. Now, fortunately, it's within when he's in prison and when he's had this hard life that things do start to somewhat turn around for him, because the jailer recognizes this guy really isn't that bad. Maybe he learned some humility by this point. He wasn't so full of himself anymore. And Joseph ended up gaining more and more power and respect and authority, was put in charge of the prisoners. God started to grant God's visions of him started to be, or God's visions given to him started to be helpful instead of getting him in trouble with his family. And he ended up, to cut a long story short, he ended up going to Pharaoh and convincing Pharaoh that this is what you need to do to prepare yourself for the oncoming famine, otherwise Egypt's going to die. And so now, eventually, after all this time, and after all, almost dying several times, now Joseph's in a position of power and authority and respect. He commands the armies. He controls the flow of food. And guess who comes groveling back after all these years? Guess who comes back begging for help? Why, it's those brothers. Here they are all those years later. Joseph was right. They did bow down to him. By all rights, you might say, shouldn't say, but you might say, by all rights, would Joseph have been so wrong to decide to take vengeance? To decide to get back at them for what they'd done to him? To turn them away and say, nope, we're not going to open our storehouses to you because of what you did all those years ago. He could have done that very easily. Perhaps when he was a brash young man, full of himself, perhaps he would have done that and said, you didn't respect me when I was your little brother? You decided to beat me and send me down a well and sell me to slavery and almost get me killed? I guess the shoe's on the other foot now. Sorry. Go home. No food for you. He could have taken vengeance. He could have taken revenge. He could have gotten back at them for what they did to him. They wouldn't have known why, probably. He didn't have to say who he was. He didn't have to reveal what had happened to that little punk. They could have gone back confused, uncertain. And of course, if he'd really been cold-blooded about it, decided that revenge is a dish best served cold, he could have told them no and then told them why. And have had to make them live the rest of their short lives hating themselves for what they'd done. But instead, he chooses otherwise. Instead, he chooses mercy. He chooses to forgive them. He chooses instead to see their terrible decision, and let's not pretend that it wasn't a terrible decision. He chooses to use that and to see that as part of God's plan for him. He chooses to see that action as a part of a process that led him to a place where he could be helpful, not just to his family, but to many people, to an entire country of people, or kingdom, I guess, of people, and to anybody else that came to Egypt begging for help. He chooses to lay aside what they would have seen as a right to vengeance, and instead to focus on mercy and on justice, to help the helpless and the starving, and those that weren't to blame for what happened to him. Because it's not like Jacob was at fault. It's not like Benjamin, his little brother, the youngest of the 12, was at fault. It's not like whatever sisters they had that never get mentioned were responsible for what happened to Joseph. But if he'd focused on vengeance and on getting back and on the pain, they would have just been collateral damage. He had a choice, and he chose not to get revenge. What about us when we find ourselves, when we find ourselves in a situation where people that once hurt us, did terrible things to us, and are now in desperate situations asking for our help? What can we do? What should we do? What would be the Christian response? Now, there are a couple things to keep in mind, though. When we think about how we can take the example of Joseph and his response to his brothers all those years later, when we think about what he did and we try to think about how that should apply to our lives or how we should see other people's reactions and how we should think about how they should react. Two things to keep in mind. First, Joseph is in power now. Joseph is no longer vulnerable. Joseph is no longer the one who can be taken advantage of. Joseph is no longer the one who's helpless, the small one, the weaker one. Joseph now has the authority. Joseph now has the power to choose one way or the other. Likewise today. Likewise for us. You don't have to make the choice. You don't have to say, don't worry about it. If there is still a situation of vulnerability, or there is still a risk, or there is still a threat. Because what makes Joseph able to do this is that he is no longer the helpless one. He is no longer the one who doesn't have the power. So that's one thing to keep in mind. The other thing is, the brothers didn't know. The brothers didn't say, oh, that's Joseph. Hey, Joseph, did you forgive us? Sorry. We take it back. We were just kidding around, you know. Can you forgive us for what we did? Joseph was the one who decided he was ready. Joseph was the one who decided he was at peace with what had happened to him and wanted to lay that aside and focus instead on help. Likewise, in our lives, or when we're thinking about how we've wronged other people, it's not up to the person that did the wrong thing to say, oh, you can forgive me, right? Or at the very least, all you can do is ask. Or all they can do when somebody has hurt you is to ask. But the forgiveness or the decision to focus instead on not holding it, but instead to help, that's up to the person that had the wrong done. And I think that's an important element of the story here. Joseph decided and chose to reveal himself and his nature and the fact that he could help them now despite what they'd done. They didn't find out first and kind of guilt him and say, oh, but your dad didn't know. Oh, but it wasn't Benjamin's fault. Joseph decided to do this on his own will, on his own authority. So with those two things in mind, Joseph had the power and Joseph made the decision. Think about how in our own lives, when we've been wronged by others, or when we have wronged others, choose vengeance, choose bloodlust, or cold, calculated cruelty because they did us wrong and they need to suffer for it, or choose instead not to forget, but to lay aside the vengeance and focus instead on how we can be helpful and how we can make relationships better with other people. It's a hard decision many times. It's something that it's not my place, it's not anybody but yourself and you and God. That's between you and God about when you're in that kind of a situation. So we're going to go now into a few minutes of open worship, center down and let God speak directly to us. If you feel led to share something, I invite you to, or God may just have something for you to hear.